Hello everyone, welcome to this live stream session from Depung Losiling Monastery. I'm Geshe Dadul. I'll be your host today. Before we dive into our evening's topic, let's take a few minutes in settling our mind, beginning with gathering the mind inward and settling it so that we could find a relatively calm state of mind by which to approach this topic and reflect on it. So, to begin with, please find yourself in a comfortable position, whatever that means to you, in whatever facilities you are in, situations you are in, settings you are in. So anyway, try to find yourself in a position, physical posture that puts you in a relatively calm, comfortable position. And now gradually try to bring the attention inward. If it helps, one can keep the eyes closed, or else if one is more attuned to keeping it open, just keep it gently open, slightly open, with its gaze aimed at the tip of the nose. So in any case, draw your mind inward by bringing its attention to something not just around you, but with you, with your body, with your mind. But to begin with, let's keep the mind on the sensations of the body. We have a saying in Tibetan as a way of preparing oneself for a mind frame of meditation aimed at deepening some insight or deepening some experience. One is reminded to bring one's body to a standstill, relatively settled state of mind, settled state, where it would mean kind of squarely settled on whatever the ground it may be, either sitting in chair or on floor, whatever it may be. See if you could settle the body with less movement, less fidgety, rather settled, squarely seated, grounded. Register that. And in such a relatively settled state of physical being, let the mind also be withdrawn from external distractions to just being with the sensations of the body. So to begin with, try to feel the sensations of the body in general. Register its presence here and feel the sensations of the body in general without focusing on any specific part or any specific sensation. Try as though you are scanning your body with your mental attention, beginning from the top, from the crown of your head. Scan your mind's attention slowly through the body, sensing the range of sensations objectively. Registering them for what they are, yet not staying with them, slowly but gradually moving on. And then back up. Bring the attention backwards from the bottom, upwards. Till it reaches the top. And now, instead of scanning it, just have a general awareness of the body, of one's presence here, feeling some sensations of part of it touching the ground, part of it in the air, hands in the gestures they are in, feeling the textures of the touch. Just an amalgamation, just a conglomeration, a collection of them being sensed objectively, thereby registering the presence of the body. Now, in the course of sensing the feelings, if there are unpleasant feelings, register them and try to move away from them to more net neutral or pleasant ones. And if you find any pleasant ones, neutral ones, try to settle the mind there a little bit so that the mind becomes infused with a similar sense of either that of equanimity or that of joy, pleasantness. And now slowly zoom into the realm of the mind itself, with the mind, observing the mind. Again doing so measuredly, without pushing too hard, yet at the same time without being too relaxed and too careless. Let the mind observe the mind while letting the mind full freedom to come up with thoughts and ideas, whatever it may be happening, while at the same time not consciously, willingly participating in them. Just see we could play the role of an indifferent onlooker who registers everything that's happening, yet at the same time keeps from participating in them, either in the form of fueling them or resisting them or liking them, disliking them, none of that. Let it be an objective, free from judgment way of observing it. Usually what happens in such situation is, since we are not fueling the thoughts, positive or negative, whatever it may be, the minds or the thoughts, the ideas would have no choice but to naturally settle down like that of a water bubble, very shortly settling into the same water it has formed out of. So in this way, give yourself this open space of mental observation, mental activity, yet not that of a usual kind, where we tend to poke our nose in every business and bring our whole being to rally after one thought or the other. thus affecting the entire dynamics of the body and mind without any control or say from ourselves. Instead, we are merely observing ourselves to begin with, our body, then our mind, where we let them full freedom to feel, to be, to reflect, whatever it may be, yet at the same time consciously keeping away from feeling them, from judging them, from liking them, disliking them. Rather maintain our ground of objective neutrality. Now slowly let go of this focus on the mind. Instead, let's return to our breath, the usual, typical, always present breath. Let's remember to come back to the breath and try to settle our mind by means of our keeping pace with a natural breath. We'll begin with 3 rounds of deep, deliberate breathing here, where we will also anchor the mind to the sensations of the breath. Let's begin with the in-breath. Maybe one more round. Coming back, let's now let the breathing settle into a natural flow, taking our time in adjusting it slowly but gradually to a more natural rhythm, where you breathe in and out through the nostrils and let the breathing just happen on its own without forcing any specific strength, length, rhythm, but rather let it be however it requires to be, even if it means uneven breaths in between rounds or within rounds. Let it be however it requires to be. All we do from our part is just to stay aware of the breathing, feel the sensations of it while keeping away from altering the breath or controlling the breath or trying to regulate the breath. let go of that. Instead, try to stay with the breath. Every process, every moment of the process, both while breathing in and breathing out, with the breath, feeling the sensations of it. And there we try to stay aware of the sensations, whatever it may be that of touch, warmth, cool, pressure, tingling, whatever it may be. We try to stay with that, and try to stay with that with alertness, attention, and a sense of delight and enthusiasm in being with the breath in this leisurely way, where all you do is walk hand in hand with the natural breath. And then all you have to do is just stay aware of it. Nothing but be aware, be with it. And being with it, you try to do so with those qualities in place, namely attention, alertness, and enthusiasm. In this way, try to stay with the breath, one breath at a time, round after round, for as long as one can. And whenever one loses the breath, and one acknowledges that, as soon as one finds oneself having been distracted, just be kind to yourself, gentle to yourself, and just merely acknowledging it, but not going overboard in beating oneself up on that, or being mad over that. Yet at the same time, be realistic in registering it, and remember to come back to the breath. And once again, be with the breath. Now slowly, whenever you feel ready, try to come out of the meditation by opening your eyes or lifting your gaze at your own convenience. Okay, welcome once again to this evening's live streaming session. Tonight we are going to deal with a topic called grief and grieving practices in Tibetan Buddhism. We'll try to understand something about grief in general, and then move into grieving practices or practices associated with losing a loved one that we undertake in Tibetan Buddhism, which could be identified as ways of grieving after the loss, making the most sensible use of the time, the period, and the situation one is going through. And of course, it will be drawing on Buddhist beliefs and customs, but in some cases, there can be areas that could be applicable and practical in other cultures, religious beliefs, with or without. So, grief could take place in so many different forms, rather in so many different situations, and it has this overarching quality of or identity of being a sense of loss, rather deep, pressing loss that kind of heavily weighs on us and then affects our social individual life, the quality of it, as well as our own individual capacities for normal functioning, normal thinking, normal way of relating with people, etc. But usually we think of grieving or grief in terms of losing a loved one, and particularly in this, I cannot call it post-COVID yet, right? We cannot call it. We're still reeling in it, and it's still a lingering problem. In some places it's still surging. So we have had this long period of COVID pandemic, and during that time so many lives have been lost, and people have been through grieving period, not just once, twice, several times, many times, and in some cases, or in most of the cases, particularly during the peak season, the situation is unimaginable in terms of how they lost them, where they were totally helpless, not able to be by their side when they needed the most, and in some cases not even being able to say final goodbyes properly, or if at all. So we can all relate from our own personal experience of one kind or the other to how heavily such losses might weigh on, and particularly with those whom one has had very close connection, close relationship. So during such times, there's a tendency to kind of confine oneself, close oneself from others, and kind of undergo the situation, the experience, all by oneself. That's when it will be felt the most, and to some extent it will be felt the hardest, in many cases almost like no return, kind of a ever plunging darkness. one thing we need to know is that grief, particularly from a Buddhist perspective, this is samsara. That is the most, it's almost like the only single guaranteed thing from our day one. So, losing someone, losing oneself, is predestined. And thus, going through grief in one way or the other, one form or the other, it's the one stage or the other, is universal. So it is helpful to remember that it is universal, that it is not just oneself who is going through that. In a way, it is one aspect where others, by mere fact of sharing in the same grief, same situation, that they can be of some comfort to us, irrespective of whether they themselves reach out or not. But the very fact that you can so assuredly say that others are all sharing in this, would have all, and then that others are all sharing in this, that others have all experienced it one way or the other, one stage or the other, and that they will experience that it is universal, that we are all same in this. That we are all same in this, that's another aspect where we bring in the aspect, the facet of similarity, right? And generate a perception of similarity that brings ourselves closer to them and has this effect, or the beginning of the effect of warming our heart towards the heart with. And then there's another aspect of not only we are similar in this, but the one that we are so overwhelmed by is something that is shared by others. It's that it's not just oneself that one's going through it. So that is something to remember and something to keep handy, to always go to when one is going through any situation, either you call it grief or not, any kind of a loss, any kind of a sadness. It's good to connect that with this reality of our shared humanity, shared commonality. In certain cases, that will help in kind of grounding us to a reality of something that's universal, something that is almost guaranteed to happen, one form or the other, and thus be able to kind of endure through it better, in a more caring and sensible way, to the extent possible, within that gloominess. Otherwise, if we keep it as a private thing, something close to yourself, and then kind of build on that through our own imagination trips, right? Over and over, rolling over our imagination trips, then the actual reality could blow up in proportion much greater than it actually is. And since we are not sharing with others, opening up to others, and then that fact that we have created, or rather a fictitious fact that we have created before us, would not only loom large, but also would seem more real, more and more real, without having anyone challenge it or affect or object to it or question it. But once we open it up to others, we would begin to see how things are not that unmanageable, things are not that bad, or things are not that what do you call unexpected, right? So and then sometimes there are ways to channel, what you call it, channel that energy of sadness into something positive, to find meaning in a suffering, in an unavoidable situation of suffering. Not that one has to go and look for suffering, but once one oneself into it already, how to then kind of be in it with the prospect of still gaining something from it, as bad as the situation may be, at least not ruling out any possibility of finding meaning, finding purpose in it. So in the scriptures, many of you may have already come across this, those who have studied Shantideva's text. There he speaks of qualities, the so-called qualities of suffering. Suffering kind of brings us to the reality of samsara. By samsara, for those who are professing Buddhists, it's fine as you understand it that way. But for others, it could be understood as this imperfect world. It is imperfect in so many ways, and that suffering, something going wrong, is almost like a built-in quality of it. And that way it kind of grounds us to the reality. It kind of brings us to the reality rather than kind of give ourselves lost in our own fairy tales, which doesn't prepare us to meet the situation when it actually presents itself to us. But suffering does. Kind of brings us to the ground, on our feet, and saying this is the reality. And be practical. Besides, suffering makes us connect with others. As I said earlier, it's not that just oneself, one alone is undergoing it. It's the fate of everyone. Right? Everyone has the potential. Not just the potential, it's almost like one is carrying the seed, inseparable from oneself. Seed in the form of our afflictions. Again, irrespective of whether one approaches afflictions from the Buddhist perspective or not, afflictions are given reality, and they are in us. Nobody has to sow them in us. They are already there in us, and in some cases we have ourselves taken extra step in fueling them, in nurturing them, in rationalizing them, and thereby kind of make them even stronger and ever ready to pop up. And those are nothing but seeds of suffering. We carry them with us. So it makes us humble, saying, yes, the suffering that we do not want, but look at how we are dealing with our afflictions. Have we ever cared to even recognize them, identify them, know them for what they are? And even worked on them. Have we cared to look deep into what causes it, what is the mechanism of it, what is the makeup of it? Have we done that? Just as we do with trivial things, material things that we are supposed to buy, trying to invest, we would kind of look around it thoroughly, but we don't do that in terms of things like afflictions, things like our mind, its nature, which really matters at every step of our life. So suffering makes us take a closer look at why why it pains the way it does. What are the mechanisms? Should everyone go through the same thing if they were to meet with the same situation? Or do they vary in how they handle it, how they come out of it, how they endure through it? If so, what makes the difference? In a way, suffering pushes us hardest in really being practical and looking at ourselves and into things that really matter. And it also presents ourselves factually to who we are in being person in progress, if at all. But still, a lot of distance to travel. And then from a Buddhist perspective, suffering, yes, as in general, suffering makes us aware of our actual situation in terms of its being imperfect. That needs to be worked on, that one has to be always on the alert to not misstep on things. But from a Buddhist perspective, even greater than that, this is samsara. And if we do not want this same suffering to repeat, we have to be able to work, first able to identify the causes of them in the form of the afflictions, and within them identify which specific affliction or what family of afflictions are responsible for this, and how to work with them. And then even further, how to uproot them, uproot afflictions without having to lose our own personality, without having to lose our own person, our being, how afflictions could be singled out, teased out, and uprooted. So suffering serves as a window to these very valuable, highly impacting, far-reaching approaches, far-reaching measures of looking at ourselves, knowing ourselves better. So, and these are factual things. I'm not making this up. I think everyone will agree, at least to some extent. And then if we do our homework more and more and more, the picture will be more and more clear to ourselves. And to that extent, we will be convinced of what suffering can do. And how would that be significant? And how that is rare to happen in other situations. Of course, it could happen, but very rare to happen unless one is confronted with the fact of suffering, and thus be really kind of practically drawn to deal with it. So that way, whenever we undergo certain situations of loss, if we remember ourselves that yes, this is a situation, the practical situation, unavoidable situation that I'm going through, yet it holds the key to knowing myself better, deeper, and to such an extent that it could have great impact on the quality of my life in terms of seeing deeper aspects of life, and thus be able to grow more and grow in a very significant practical way. So if at the very least we can approach suffering in that way, that eases our sense of being overwhelmed by it, our sense of being helpless in the face of suffering, but rather kind of looking for an opportunity to kind of at least struggle with it and defeat its purpose, which is totally defeating us, but rather kind of come out victorious in exposing it, in seeing much deeper values. So, irrespective of whether we succeed in doing that or not, but if even beginning with an intellectual understanding or one's own experiences, personal experiences of one kind or the other, if we could begin to wonder about that aspect of the suffering, sadness, loss, whatnot, then we would be able to at least mitigate the amount of, unwarranted negativity, unwarranted gloominess that we bring to an already gloom situation, even realistically gloom situation. We kind of make it much gloomer. And these aspects of approaching it from a slightly positive, lighter way, without compromising the reality, can cut down on the unnecessary, unwarranted blow-ups that we would have already otherwise done through our imaginations and made it as real as anything, but only to ourselves, not to others. But that's what matters to us. What else are there? Yes, as we touched on a little bit earlier, going through these periods of grief, and we have so many ways of making the grief even unique, personal, private, individualistic, by so, what do you call, creatively, not in the positive sense though, so creatively touching different aspects. Like we could make a situation worse than it is by approaching it from different ways. Of course, there are aspects of reality to these things as well, but we tend to make them bigger than they are. What I'm referring to is in the case of loss to COVID-19, and likewise in other situations, very often we don't get to say a proper goodbye to our loved ones, or sometimes we don't even have a clear idea of what actually happened that made them pass away, and that there is no prospect of ever knowing it at all. Situations can happen in so different ways, right? Take the case of the current war in Ukraine. So many situations such as this are happening on a daily basis. Where one would have no chance whatsoever, even knowing the slightest, even having the slightest clue of how one's loved ones died because of this current, situation there. So there is always some aspect of reality to whatever we tend to focus on, find out. But then we have to catch ourselves from overly emphasizing them and blowing them up and making it even more unbearable. So that aspect of how we, through our wonderful skill of imagination, yet we use it in unfavorable ways, and thus make it yet another very sophisticated tool of making things grimmer than they are. So these we have to know beforehand from our own little experiences of daily life, how we have blown it up, how we have jumped into conclusion, how we have made it too personal, how we have kind of and that way we'll be able to kind of apply that to future situations much graver than these, and at least keep ourselves from making the situation worse than it is. Usually we make them worse, and then we do so in such a way that it becomes eventually totally unbearable, leading us to extreme steps. And we do that single-handedly by closing our eyes, closing our space, and reeling in that world, making it ever bigger, bigger, bigger. So in all of this, one very important solution is seeking counseling, either in a formal sense or in an informal sense. Basically, opening up, sharing. But the mere act of sharing it is kind of releasing it to that aspect, to that extent. The pent-up negative energy would have been released, and we'll be able to see it afresh. Very often and I think just the mere fact of coming out of one's room, mingling with people, and being in the nature, even that itself is very helpful. And that is a very clear indication of how, in our own private room, close settings, how we are shutting down on all of those natural positivities and doubling down on the negativity, of which we already have a justified, actual instance, but we blow it up. And that's how the doubling down and the shutting down kind of makes it worse. So it's very helpful to open up and reach out. Yeah, that part we really need to push ourselves. It is easily said than done, because once we're caught in a particular situation, it could be so dark that one would feel like it is not worth opening to anyone. One will again come up with all sorts of excuses, like, oh, I would be shameful, this and this and this, all of this, and that kind of keeps one so intact with the decision not to open up. But one has to take the courage to open up, to share with people, either very trusted ones that you want to have, or you go to an actual facility, actual service. They are wonderful. It's wonderful that caring people have set up all of these, all such facilities. Very often these are facilities opened by people who had gone through these situations themselves and had felt the actual need for this. And that's one way of finding meaning in one's own sadness, in one's own gloomy situation, where very often this is a very, very popular trend among people who have been grief-stricken and had been hit by, unimaginable trauma and loss, that they try to make up for their loss, as well as find meaning in their loss and find purpose in their loss by setting up such missions, such projects. So there are many such projects available there, well-meaning. One could avail of them. So, along with this, in Tibetan Buddhism, what I think of them as coping strategies to deal with one's grief. At least if looked at from anthropological side or from a scientific side, these so-called customs, though rooted in Buddhist beliefs and theology, yet at the same time they serve an equally important, viable social and cultural purpose in coming up with a fitting strategy of coping with grief in the form of grieving practices. Many of you are aware in Tibetan Buddhism, I think in the other Buddhist traditions as well, but more openly in the Tibetan Buddhist world, we believe that if we have a grieving period of 49 days, right? We see that since Buddhism believes in life after life, rebirth, it says that the longest a person who has passed would take to be in the undecided in-between world before taking formal rebirth would be 49 days. And that's the maximum. Within that, they would have already found their next life, next rebirth. So every seventh day is believed that they undergo a mini death in the in-between world, in the Bharto intermediate state. So during that time, seeing that as a pocket of opportunity where they decide their next next tentative rebirth, which could affect their actual rebirth if they were to take on that life. So likewise, we think of every 1 week as a pocket of opportunity in making a difference in their next rebirth or tentative rebirth that they might fall into by undertaking prayer sessions and dedicating them to their goodness. But what I think actually happens is it is helping more those who are left behind than the one who has, than it might do to the one who has passed away. Because to the ones who are left behind, doing this seem to find a purpose within their state of loss, within their state of grief. They find a purpose, they find a meaning in doing something by which now they are kind of making up for the loss. So they undertake such practices, prayers. And this, I think, is a very smart way of doing it. Like in the West, we do nowadays when people die, they ask for not flowers, something that perishes, but they would ask for people to donate to good causes and whatnot, dedicate, and in a way that's dedicating the merit in the memory of the past one. And likewise, some even go further in really establishing an actual project, actual mission, actual foundation to address a particular issue, social, emotional, issue that may have been either very dear to the past soul, or may have been one that the past one's beloved one succumbed to. And then another thing is, since we believe in rebirth, we undertake certain taking the help of astrologers, we commission doing horoscope in the name of the deceased, and find out what their prospects are in the next life. And whenever they find that yes, a certain measure, certain external additional measure could help them change their switch their rebirth or change their rebirth, not what you call arbitrarily like this, but kind of timing it with their what do you call switching time, if you will, when they undergo a mini death, then they have to figure out the next birth, kind of trying to influence that opportunity, that pocket of opportunity, by sending merits dedicated to them. It could be even stronger if these merits are accumulated by using things, belongings that the departed soul owned, and dedicating them to their goodness. So anyway, sometimes these horoscope calculations, readings will come in the form of saying, you create this statue, you build this tanka. They may say tanka statue, whatnot, but it could be done in so many different ways according to one's own economic facility. It could be a mere drawing or a photo. It could be done in so many ways, but they do resort to such means, and thereby kind of get themselves to do something in the name of the deceased one. And that, I think, is as a creative coping method for those who are left behind, in feeling good that they have at least done something, that they could be now reborn like that. So that's one way. And there is another practice called, we call these called kyeta. Kyeta means birthmark, but not birthmark as we usually understand. I'm literally translating it from Tibetan. Kyeta. Kye means birth, ta is mark. But here it could be called birth. What would that be? Birth symbol? Yeah, maybe birth symbol, birth artifact. Oh, I don't know. Birth. I don't know. What else should I say? But anyway, so they, through these horoscopes, they are asked to commission or obtain a statue or a photo or a tanka, depending on one's own economic possibilities, and to commission one such a statue of a particular deity, and then install it, kind of properly bless it, consecrate it, and then install it, and then offer it to a monastery or keep it in your room, whatnot, in the name of the deceased person, and that could affect the fate of them. So irrespective of whether it actually helps the deceased person, but it has really helped the persons left behind. And this could be extended to so many different ways of doing that people do in the West also. Right? They go in so many different. They go in so many different extents. Right? Such as like requesting any gifts to be routed to a particular mission, particular project, etc., etc. Like, right? But then there is another practice in the Tibetan Buddhism called Changwa, which literally means purification, which involves undertaking a very not too elaborate, but it could vary in elaboration, in range of elaboration, but it could be done with the help of 4 or 5 ritual masters. In undertaking a ritual procedure through which they undertake a purification practice, like we do of Vajrasattva, but they do that in association with, in connection with other deities, other idams, other titular deities and whatnot, other Buddhas. And that involves, the whole process involves purification. It's quite elaborate compared with usual purification practices. And thus, there's a specific ritual procedure done during which either the dead body is kept nearby, or any, which is not necessary, but they could have something to represent the deceased person, be that in the form of a cloth or some belonging, some anything, and then with that close by, they undertake the purification practice, and the purification practice kind of proceeds in stages to eventually purifying them thoroughly to placing them to a state of Buddhahood. Again, the family members are available, are allowed to sit through the ritual and witness all of that if they want to, and thus witness this process being undertaken by lamas, officiated by famous popular teacher, etc., etc. At their own request, they could request specific monks to be part of that, and then undertake the rituals in the name of the deceased, and that involves purification. As a Buddhist, something that we should be very concerned about is our own negativities, our own bad karmas, misdeeds that we may have accumulated through our body, speech, and mind. Mind-wise, it is quite easy. Body, speech, also easy, but not as quick and frequent. But they have not only their impact and effect here and now in the real world, but at the same time they leave some imprint, and that imprint awaits being ripened into a karmic result, either in this very life, or was open in lives after this. That's what is most most concerning and bothering, right? In that they carry the seed for subsequent suffering that could lead to more suffering, like that, and that could be a chain reaction of sufferings, negativities, and thus and this is and thus getting to commission, getting to sponsor a ritual, a formal ritual procedure through ritual masters of one's own choice and confidence. It will be very helpful in coping with one's own grieving situation. And this particular ritual, I have been told, not that I have myself particularly undertaken it, but it varies in It varies in details, and some could have very detailed, almost like graphic description of what processes they are led through until the full awakening. Again, I think as much as it has values and benefit to the actual person who died, but the value is more to those who are left behind, in getting to reflect deeper on life, as well as in rejoicing in in engaging in some positive act motivated by good intention and motivation, and dedicating it for the sake of someone, and thereby also getting to kind of familiarize with the deeper meaningful life. That, I think, is a grieving practice, but a very smart, positive way of doing it. Because in the meantime, when you yourself do something for the sake of others, for others, that's itself very lifting. And that's one thing we need to remember, that when we go through grieving, through severe grief and periods of sadness, although it will be difficult, but if we could remember to relate with others when they go through a similar situation that one is in at present. And even without that, also kind of relate with others in terms of how everyone has the same potential and whatnot. And that let that kind of open oneself up in reaching out, in offering some help. Then if we could do that, the very fact, the very instant we offer something to others is kind of extending our heart, expanding our heart. To that extent, the pent-up suffering would be diminished, decreased. Right? So that's why, in general, generating love and compassion, sense of kindness, for all of which there is practical, practical, rational, real, practical, rational to ground them on. Be that on the fact of our common humanity, of our shared fundamental similarities, and one of them being how we all aspire for happiness and do not want suffering. And despite that, what we go through in life is more suffering, or sometimes that we ourselves mess things up and make them into a suffering situation. Right? It's like, even if that's what one doesn't want, one kind of almost bumps into it, or one almost mess up things and then made that into one. And then what we want is happiness, but even with facilities around, we hardly are aware of them. Oh, I'm telling about our own mental capacities, our potentials, here and with us, always with us. Yet they seem so distant and so obscure that we hardly are aware of them. And then on top of that, we kind of give into our own negativities and mess up situations. So even a potential positive situation could be messed up into a totally unwarranted yet unimaginable suffering. So we lack in competency in materializing our rightful aspirations. So in that also we are same. So we have so many grounds to kind of generate empathy. Based on that, it has a very potential ground for generating compassion. And when we generate compassion, our heart gets to be expanded, gets to host compassion, gets to become compassion. And to that extent, we open up to others. The prospect of helping others, joy for others is opened. But at the same time, first and foremost, we ourselves become the beneficiary of that open heart. Very often our suffering, even in the deepest of our grief, sadness, is because of our selfishness, our self-absorption, our self-obsession. non-obsessiveness, compassion, kindness, beginning with empathy, are the only antidotes to them. So even in this respect, in kind of giving us some reason or chance to open up, is also there in terms of these measures that we take up, or that are prescribed in the scriptures in terms of doing these pujas, prayers, right? All with the heart to benefit someone. And then whenever we have such opportunities, not just merely dedicate the benefit to the singular diseased person, but rather kind of dedicate it to all, including the diseased person. Right? Also, those are methods prescribed and what we call encouraged, and thus in the process of that we begin to see how our own sufferings are mitigated. And overall, with regard to these situations, one thing to remember, although it will vary with individuals how it affects them, but in the Buddhist scriptures, meditation on death and meditation on impermanence are extolled to the point of saying they are the supreme among the meditations. Not so much to get stuck in those facts, but rather to know them for what they are upfront, and let them be a live affirmation all through, so that we could touch every aspect of our life through that light. Be that suffering, we say, okay, it's going and coming. Be that happiness, it's going and coming, so that we do not get carried away by them, either in the positive sense or in negative sense, to the oblivion of anything reality happening around. So it's not so much, not at all to get stuck in those facts, but to acknowledge them as part and parcel of our life, and then come up with a more grounded, more realistic reading of life, of what needs to be done, how it could be done, so that we will be able to take situations, be that pleasant, unpleasant, only for what they are, just for what they are, not worse than them or more blown up than them. It's likewise in the case of these dark times. One thing to remember is that yes, dark times come and go. They are not there forever to stick by. And then if one makes efforts, then even more than that, they will go away, even quicker. But even without that, they will go. Although one will want to make effort, but even without them also, they will come and go. It's just built into them. So I think I took much more time than usual. I thought of covering things from both the traditions, or both the traditions, meaning Buddhist tradition and non-Buddhist, secular or common sense aspects. And with this, I stop here and hope that this was of some help, some use in reflecting on our actual uncompromised reality of life for all of us, and be able to rise from that in generating a confirmation that I will try to be more kind, more compassionate, more meaningful, more respectful to my fellow human beings to begin with, and by extension to my fellow other sentient beings. After all, that's what we have the potential to do in our own ways, and that time will be up one day for all of us. So why not do so with the prospect of memories of good things that one has done in touching others' lives, in making difference in others' lives, and at least in being creative, in dealing with the darkest situations that one has encountered, how one has at least tried to leave no stones unturned in finding meaning, purpose, transforming situation, even the worst of them. But at the very least, using one's own example in reaching out to others, in relating to others, in making sense with others when they go through a situation because of one's own first-hand experience. Yeah, with this I want to stop here and thank you all for your attention. Thank you. Let's dedicate whatever merits we may have gained from this session to the betterment of everyone, more particularly to the prospect of every sentient being, including humans, to be able to deal with their situations, even including the very bad ones, sad ones, in a relatively more sensible, creative, meaningful way, and thereby come out from them not worse off, but better off, and more hopeful, both for oneself and for others, and come out knowing oneself, one's own potentials, one's own capacities, possibilities. Thank you so very much.